All right. I like to take verbal POIs. So if you type in the chat, I won't be able to see it. I like to start my speech now. We think that at the end of the day, as a prime young footballer, we think that it is up to your obligation and your benefit in order for you to actively voice out against the injustice. So I'm first going to go through the models and two constructive arguments coming from side prop today. First, what boycotting the Qatar Cup will do for the society and how that is better for the actor. And second, why you as an individual will be easier to opt in into future narratives and gain support on the long term. But before that, let me offer you the model first, right? Two pieces of setup. First, what is the problem with Qatar Cup or the country in general? We think that the problem with the Qatar Cup is that workers from other countries, they suffer from things like overwork or dying from overwork in the Qatar Cup. Also, being like they die from like accidents, like falling off of buildings, and they get heavy injuries. The problem with that is there are no regulation and no change in force in the status quo. So we think that it is a detrimental harm and it should be voiced out. But the problem is that the workplace cannot opt out of it because the country at home is going to be very poor and they cannot get rid of the capitalistic structure. So they're forced and coerced into staying and constructing for the Qatar Cup. We also think that the country itself has informational control and a lot of the problems. Second, what does the actor look like, right? They're already progressive since it is framed that they're a progressive footballer. So likely already they have this narrative carried out in the society in the first place. We also think that interviewers do ask political questions already. So it is very hard to steer away from discourse or about social discourse because they're exposed to it on a daily basis. The progressive footballer are also likely going to done things that they don't necessarily regret because they're in their prime and they have possibly fulfilled their career. They're going to quit their prime eventually. So there is not much harm as to why themselves has to sacrifice for the bigger benefit of, let's say, for example, the team. So with that said, moving on to the first argument, why you boycott for the social justice. So there is already a sort of awareness in the Qatar Cup at an international level. So likely it is going to be easy for them to boycott with the proper justification. It will not be something that people will question or already has to research upon knowing if they boycott, because likely the community itself is going to have well enough awareness to know the actor's incentive. This pushes for the easier acceptance by the public. However, the problem right now with Qatar Cup is that no one is acting out on this, and we think that it is in the best interest of the actor, for the society, and for themselves in order to boycott this. We think that by a footballer being in their prime, it is going to bring the largest impact upon solving the problem and bring awareness and stance to the outside world. So young footballers are most famous out of sports stars, or like they have a huge capital, and likely they'll have many supporters as well who will likely support their narrative. This might look like Cristiano Ronaldo, who has a biggest Instagram following and such, and can actively utilize their follower base and create huge media discourse. Therefore, this makes our actor the most needed in order to address change. This also means that they have to actively voice out because they have the capital to do so, and they have the ability to create large media discourse. We also say that the benefits of voicing out trickles down to the footballer also, because the media attention that you get is going to be something that benefits you as an individual and the kind of discourse that you get around you. And this is important because media attentions are usually the prerequisite to support, and it benefits your career in the long term. Trickling down effect will also directly benefit them. So this means this will also be extended upon later. The person is likely also going to feel obligated, because we think that on a principle level, there's a high obligation, because people are somehow going to still see you as betraying if you're actively competing in unjust ground, despite that you have a progressive moral and despite that you don't support this necessarily. So we think that by not boycotting, it is also detrimental to the harm to you, because people are going to see that despite you have this progressive idea, you don't actually carry it out and you conform to the toxic narrative that the people enforce upon you. So even if they say, even if side opposites say that we're going to lose supporters, we think that this is largely mitigated, right? Because we are able to get more attention in other comps, and people are going to see you as someone who is progressive and who has the right principle moral. We think that it is something that will be largely mitigated. We also think that by competing into the Qatar Cup, you are going to have supporters lost on either side of the house. So moving on to my second argument, why this portray the actor as a better person, right? We think that the shift of activism is likely going to have the portrayal of you as an individual to be positive. For example, Muhammad Ali. Being seen as a progressive and changing actor is very important in this day and age where we support the correct kind of principle and we support the correct kind of morals, right? So American women football, they were able to gain the equal pay and they were being portrayed as life-changing as like progressive models. Significantly into politics and bring into the younger generation and the audience will also be likely going to trickle down to your benefit as an individuals. And we think that by portraying yourself as a progressive model will likely going to bring the best kind of social discourse that you're able to get. You gather more support in the long term also, right? Because you can play into the image on the long term. This is also good for you and voicing out your injustice because it will be easier for you to opt into the narrative about voicing out for injustice in the long term. What does this look like? For example, right now you boycott the Qatar Cup and you make this image that you are a progressive activist and you have the correct kind of morals. So later on, even if you actually have injustice fallen upon your own fallen upon you as an individual, it is going to be easier for you to opt into the narrative and actually voice out against the injustice because you have already done so in the past. We think that there is a principle consistency, right? We also think that the actor is going to feel better in general because you're going to actually push forward what you believe and you're actually going to act out against something that you believe. For example, Bill Russell enabled many other sports teams to form and the inspiration that it has is very important. Because you're national representative, you get the international attention also. And because you have the kind of capital in order to actively push forward this kind of narrative.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the Leader of Opposition.
Hi, can I be heard? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, very good. Nice. All right. Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, so first off, I'm actually going to start with a few points of rebuttal. So first of all, they came up here and said that these football players are actually in their prime, but this actually leads to them possibly fulfilling their career already. But we say that this point is actually not true because a lot of footballers' careers actually only begin when they reach their prime, because their prime is actually the most important part of their careers and the reason why they have been working hard for so long. Therefore, this part of characterization does not stand. Second part rebuttal. They mentioned about the media attention that you will get when as a football player when you boycott this World Cup, right? But we say that the opposite is actually true because boycotting an event would not mean as much as the international media would likely gloss over the issue and not give much attention to the purpose of the boycott, right? And this will be integrated into my arguments later on. Now, we also say that the media does not have the incentive to report on young individual football players, progressive or not, when they're doing something when they are doing something, because if based on your premise, right, it is something that should be done, right? And last point of rebuttal on their point of backlash and the people not supporting them if they don't do so, right? But they said that people don't like you because you say you are progressive, but you don't act upon it. But we say that it's actually untrue because what incentives do people actually have to camp behind their computer screens waiting to see if someone doesn't boycott something that should be boycotted, right? So we say that their argument can easily be mitigated because it is simply unlikely to happen. Okay, now let me actually go through a few points of characterization in my speech, and I prefer my POIs verbally, by the way. Okay, so progressive young football players in their prime and their relation with the World Cup. So what is this? Understand that athletes in their prime have a limited time to show their skills, right? And because they spent a quarter of their lives actually training so hard and putting in so much effort, we say that it is very unjustified to take all of that away. Why is this so? So being able to join a World Cup means a lot to these athletes because the World Cup is the largest competition and the hardest to win because of how it only happens every 4 years. So if my prime is at 25 years old, right, and if I boycott this World Cup, my training time from my last World Cup when I was 21 for 4 years will be wasted, and I have to wait another 4 years for the next World Cup, which is a total of 8 years. So by that time, I may likely A, lose my form, B, may, be injured, or C, maybe just out of the football league, right? And second part of characterization. Now, boycotting, we say that boycotting will actually not outweigh the harms that will be put onto the football player. Why is this so? This is because A, the damage has already been done towards these workers, and at the end of the day, it will be even worse when these workers have been exploited again and again, and they don't even get to see their work being valued by other people. And B, as I mentioned before, these football players' careers depends on the World Cup because it is a giant gateway for their fan base to grow and them to receive the recognition that they deserve. So if we strip them of this sole way of receiving what they work hard for all of these years, it will be difficult for them to actually survive and live the comfortable life that they want to after they have retired from all the painful, hectic sports. So why does someone want to be a football player in the first place? It's because they love sports and because they want to live a better life in the future. They can simply go do another easier job, but no, they choose something that they are passionate about. Therefore, we should allow this gateway for them to continue what they're doing. So what is our actual mechanism and what do we want instead of boycotting, right? We want them to actually join, right? And to spread the word even more through various ways inside of the tournament. So inside of the tournament, and I'll go into how this will look like later on. Now, our yardsticks and our arguments are based on A, which side better benefit the young footballer, and B, which side better provides justice to the people being exploited in the Qatar 2022. Now, let's jump right into my arguments. First argument, let's talk about the football player, right? How will our mechanism actually work better for the football player? Now, let's take a look. On our side, this progressive football player will be able to not only compete, but they may be actually seen as a spokesperson for the protection of human rights. Now, how is this likely to happen and how does this look like, right? This may look like them, the possible ways that they could do it following our mechanism is them possibly kneeling down for respect or showing the world by wearing a symbolic accessory to bring in a bigger message. And this will be even more effective and even more important on our side because then you can actually garner the attention of the people who are actually interested in sports rather than shunning these people away, putting them in the dark and saying that, oh, you guys don't get to watch the things that you love, which is football, because of this problem that is ongoing. No, we are catering to the bigger audience here. We are able to value the work of these workers since we see that this problem has already been happening for a long time, and we are also able to cater to the football player by not ruining his career, and we're also able to cater to the vast majority and the media, giving them content and giving the people on the ground something to talk about. So this is why we say that this argument is very important in today's debate. Second argument, I'm going to be talking about efficiency, right? Now, like I mentioned before, boycotting an event wouldn't mean as much as the international media would just likely gloss over the issue and not give as much attention to the purpose of the boycott. So what does this mean, right? This actually looks like the media not even caring about the individual countries who decide to boycott, and they don't even care about the reasoning behind it. And we say this is very detrimental and this is very unfair to these athletes, right? Because what it's doing is actually washing the sacrifices that these football players make. And why this is so detrimental is because, like I mentioned before, my whole case is revolved around these precious football players that spend all their lives doing what they love the most. So let me actually draw a line in the middle, right? Side government, they would want a world where the football players are able to advocate for these exploited workers and able to gain their support and their fan base very slowly by being one of the 100 people that boycott the Qatar World Cup, right? And they want everything to be done slowly because they say that if you boycott it, they will eventually stop. But no, I don't think they will ever stop because there are still countries that will want to participate in the Qatar 22. So why not side with side opposition where you can actually make a change where change really counts? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank the leader of that fine speech. Wait, someone is muted, is possibly saying something.
Yeah, I'm saying something. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, we can hear you just fine. I also heard you raise the POIs occasionally, so I don't think it's
okay. Okay.
good. Wonderful. We'd like to now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly audible. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'll take POIs exclusively through chat. Please don't interrupt me. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember the majority of sports players that were in their prime, because just like how there's hundreds of debaters that are in their prime, there's hundreds of footballers now and in the past that are also in their prime. But the few individuals that the average citizens remember are those that have created radical shifts, are the ones that have been seen as icons of social movements, and are those that get long-term support. So not everyone can be boso, but we increase the likelihood of long-term popularity and financial sustainability uniquely on our side of the house. 3 questions I'll answer. Firstly, are we going to be effective in getting change? Secondly, on a principle level, why football players ought to boycott, and thirdly, on the practical of improving popularity and the image of the player. But before I move on, I want to make 2 quick clarifications. Firstly, they tell you that medias are not going to show young activists. I want to flag 2 things here. Firstly, this is not true, right? Because the characterization that we specifically give you in first is that we're not just talking about any individual. We're talking about the sports players that are specifically at their prime, that have the supporter base and the media influence. This looks like people like Maya Monroe, who's a WNBA player and retired for the sole purpose of activism for prison inmates and was the Times most influential 200 figure. This was like Muhammad Ali, who refused to accept the draft of Vietnam for ethical reasons and then went to jail against it, garnered massive attention and started a new movement in the 1960s called the counterculture generation. They have massive influence, they have a lot of people supporting them, and this is why they're likely able to get this media attention through the fan base that they already have acquired and the more that they're going to get from making radical shifts. But secondly, even if it's not as influential as we want to tell you in itself, the platform that they're doing these types of boycotting and activism in itself is probably a very big platform. So it's probably going to be controversial as opposition claims. This backlash then gets discourse, people get shocked, and then they listen. That's already framed in first. We never get a response. But secondly, if this is true, then presumably all of their harms fall as well. And this just becomes a no impact debate. So all of their harms are washed as well if just no one wants to listen. Secondly, the counterprop that they then give you is that you're going to wear cultural symbols or another way of advocacy as a counter plan. 2 things I want to know. Firstly, this is a massive strategic flaw and it's just losing material from the start of the bat, because that means they can see that we need to make change and it's okay to sacrifice small levels of hate for societal good, and that's in the actor's incentive to do so. And this means all of their responses about not getting media attention also wash out their own place, and this is unclear as to why this is the one time people care about them. But secondly, now the comparative just becomes that we need to prove that we are more effective. Why then is this true? Firstly, because there's no differentiation that LO gives you about the type of counter plans and then the type of advocacy that we're going to do. So if that's the type of stuff they want to talk about, then presumably we can just co-opt these benefits as part of the way we want to do so. But secondly, if we have to take the more hard stance of radical action, we're happy to do so, because that's the only moment in which you get a massive narrative shift and you create large shift in people's mind. You get a large media attention and a large backlash, and you create massive discourse. Secondly, then I want to quickly talk about the principle. I want to note here that this is really important, because the characterization of individuals that we give you is that there is a massive moral hazard because you feel guilty knowing that you could have done something that aligns more with your views, knowing that the people who currently support you are ones that are many times also progressive, that the people around you are also progressive, many times are minorities, but you choose not to do it for the type of selfish incentive or the just wanting to go on another NBA game, especially when you're already very popular, you already have a lot of things and luxuries in life. And this is the largest harm in the debate for 2 reasons. Firstly, because the type of like mental hazard or moral hazard that you undergo is something that you can just never forget. It's just something that regret like stays in your mind forever. You're just like, what if I did this? What if I did this? What could have changed? And the type of regret is something that lasts forever. But secondly, even if they are continuing their prime and they are like competing, then presumably they're probably like really distracted. They probably can't compete to their 100% capacity anyways. So the type of like benefits that opposition opposition wants to put about, talk about are probably quite marginal. Then lastly, I want to deal with the most important clash and the tangible benefit for the actor. I want to deal with the one main op contention that we get here. They tell you that you waste 8 years of time and the hard work you put in, and you sacrifice individuals' popularity and they become disenfranchised. 4 layers of response here. Firstly, I think the premise is untrue that they want to go back into the field in the first place. We already frame out in first, if you've been part of sports for so long and you've already been at the prime, you've probably experienced a lot of the luxuries or a lot of the fame or the type of benefits that come with being in your prime. And that's probably something you've already experienced to a sufficient extent, and it's not a massive harm on the individual. But we think that the fact that you're already acknowledging that you're in this type of stressful industry would probably mean you would prefer to live off the public image anyways, because it's easier, there's no physical hazard on you. And we already proved to in first why that's likely to happen. But secondly, I want to point out that this is probably symmetric in our worst case scenario, because these individuals have already done very progressive acts. And the conservative people who they want to talk about probably already hate on these people anyway, simply because they're seen as a progressive sports player, or they're seen as a progressive footballer. So the type of sponsors that they might want to talk about, or the type of individuals that are going to support them, losing fan base, probably already don't support them anyway. So there's not a massive delta there. Third response I want to make is that the harm just severely outweighs the benefits that they want to talk about. Firstly, we think there's a massive losing of the primary fan base that you currently have, because if you assume that the frame is true and there's no activists, people will see it as immoral and they'll just talk about it as performative talk and there's no real action. The people who currently support you are likely to be really disappointed in you and lose their trust in you as an icon of a progressive person within the sporting field, and thus you lose out on the people who are currently immediately supporting your financial income and well-being. But secondly, we already give you the framing in first about how there's a massive moral hazard as an individual. The people in your close surrounding are likely to question you, you feel guilty, and that's a regret you'll never be able to wash out. The third response I want to make here is that the likelihood of success and people remembering you in the long term is just much bigger on our side of the house, because as I already talked about in my intro, there's probably 3,000 football teams in the world, but no one remembers you after your prime. I don't remember a single Korean football player, even though I'm literally Korean. But if you create a fan base and a progressive image and narrative around yourself, people continuously support you, because these types of ideologies are one that have been stuck within society for a very long time, and the people who support the types of movements that you support, like Black Lives Matter and Kaepernick, are people that are continuously going to support you even after your prime is over. This looks like Emma Watson, who progressed from a key actor to a radical activist. Presumably she doesn't really need to do as much acting anymore. She can just be part of this movement, and that's how she gets a lot of her funding and a lot of her popularity. But lastly, then I want to quickly talk about how we're able to get a stepping stone. Before I move on, I'll take a POI if there is any. 3, 2, 1. Okay, if not, I'll just move on. Lastly, then, I want to quickly add some new substantive material on how we're able to use this as a stepping stone for other teams or for other minority actors to contribute into the types of movement and get all the type of same trickle-down benefits that we tell you about in first. Other teams, we tell you, are going to treat this type of movement as a stepping stone, which is really important for the overall impact, because if we increase enough teams or increase enough individuals who are able to recognize that this is a problem, that ignites a bigger social discourse. But also, if people are participating into treating the problem seriously, then cancel culture, the readjustment of World Cup and actual regulations are likely to happen. This is where we directly flip opposition's premise, because if opposition is going to say there's going to be massive amounts of media backlash and people are going to disenfranchise these individuals for the types of activism that they do, we directly flip this and say that that's a really big benefit, because now you also have a lot of bad media attention on these sporting events. You look at the core of the issue, people are more likely to care about you. You get a lot of social media discourse and people talking about why these types of actions are happening in the first place. And that's a lot better than staying silent. We refuse to sit back and watch people struggle. I'm so proud to propose.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank the DPM for that fine speech. And now I'd like to call upon the DLO. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
You're perfectly audible whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Right, I prefer my POIs verbally, so just unmute and then yes. I think I might be able to listen, hear the mic. Yeah. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So government's case on this whole premise today into this debate, they've only been relying on the fact that these footballers have a lot of voice, and then the only thing that they can do now to actually gain awareness is actually through boycotting, and there's no other solutions. And if they do any other solution, they'll get backlash and so on. And then they tell you how players are only being remembered because of their actions and not because of their prime. Yes, we tell you that's only case, but when we tell you if we can mitigate the harm of them, saying that these players can still use their voice in many other methods instead of boycotting while still protecting their whole career, we win today's debate. So before that, moving on to my rebuttals first. So they say footballers have a lot of voice. They get backlash if they don't do this. We tell you that voice doesn't have to come from it doesn't have to come from boycotting. We can save their career, but at the same time create awareness in other activities. For example, we don't have to directly boycott the activity, but we can still yet join Qatar World Cup. At the same time, we are still using using the platform you have in the World Cup to actually spread the awareness that you want to spread at the end of it. For example, for instances of like actions that are still creating awareness, we can give you examples of Cristiano Ronaldo pushing away the Coca-Cola bottle in the Euro 2020. Even though it was something that is in the tournament, it was still something that is being spreaded throughout the world, and then awareness can spread. So we can that it doesn't have to come from boycotting, and you can yet still join the competition and still spread awareness. You can still do something like wearing a rainbow armband, for example, like what teams have done for captains in the inside Euro 2020 to show their disagreement towards Hungary's homophobic policy. So we tell you how. So this mitigates the harm of them being a progressive footballer while actually being guilty of what they've done because they've not actually spreaded the awareness and so on. And second of all, they say players are only remembered for their actions. And we say that's not a thing, and it's not mutually exclusive on their side as well. We tell you how even if they are actually doing this action, some of these people won't be actually remembered as well, because even if they have their attention, their sole jobs come and income comes from the career itself. They're unlikely to create a good career, and if they miss out this prime, it means that they cannot earn because no one is paying for them to play. Imagine if because you have to understand that World Cup is a very prestigious event and a very important event. It means that a lot of eyes are going to go on to this World Cup, and it means that a lot of clubs will be scouting players at the same time. It means that if they're actually going to perform well in their prime, it means that more likely or not, they're going to get accepted into better clubs and get better salary, which is going to give them a better image as well. At the same time, providing them the salary for them to survive. You have to understand that this is their whole life, their whole career, and they have been done to train this thing. They have no other skills they can do. And then even if you say that spreading awareness do actually increases their fame and then make a lot of they can also gain side income through this as well, being an influencer and activist. With that, it is not true as well. We see how awareness doesn't actually mean much as well, because at the end of the day, the people supporting this awareness are not the one paying at the first. They're not the one being paid. Second of all, we can give you examples of how these people who are actually pushing for awareness and movements are still not yet famous. For example, would side government actually remember Marcus Rashford, who actually provided free meals for all students in England? I think they would remember, right? So we tell you how on their side, even if they say that they are going to spread awareness and that's going to make them remember them longer, we say that's not the case as well. Instead, their whole career is going to come down. Their awareness won't be spreaded. And then third of all, and then they talked about how social justice and it's easier acceptance for people on the floor because people are now more aware. And then they say that people are already aware of these cases in the world, and then more likely or not, they are just wanting people to push for this in urging a change. We say that, as what I've said just now through rebuttals, the few rebuttals, we said that boycotting might be urging a change, but it doesn't bring a prerequisite action to actually force the change. Because first of all, there's more proper. It means that when you're boycotting this event, you have to understand what happens. It means that these prime players who are going to get the most views for this World Cup are no longer joining World Cup. It means that less people are going to watch. It means that Qatar and the country where this player originates from will have a very tense relationship. And most likely, these progressive people come from very advanced countries like the US and also Germany or England. But if these are the people that are most likely be involved in the international relations issues to solve this problem. If they're not going to give them a proper relationship between these players and everything, we tell them it is very hard to force them to change because you're not helping Qatar whatsoever. And then they see that they're increasing a tense relationship with this country. They're not helping whatsoever. And then we tell you how the boycott would actually create a domino effect, which is not going to solve anything because of the situation effect created. And I will explain this further through my substantive. So now I'll be moving on to my substantive, proving to you as to how side governments is going to cause a domino effect, which even if they are going to create an awareness in today's debate, they are no longer in a place where they are able to force a solution out. Because you have to understand, human rights has already been in. The domino effect is that human rights have already been infringed, you cannot reverse it by boycotting. And you can't spread even if you spread the message by boycotting, yeah, that's already happened. You have to understand that boycotting only means that you're most likely losing viewerships on the World Cup. You have to understand that if viewership reduces, it means that whole profits come down. It means that it means that if they are going to have less and less profit, it means that they are going to find more and more harsher ways to actually gain profit from it. It means that they're going to solve it from the cost itself. It means that bringing out cheap labors and so on. It means that to compensate on the reduced profit, which the problem now in Qatar is that all these humans write about exploiting cheap labors and so on. So if you're going to reduce this profit, they're going to come out on cheaper levels and reduce profits from getting those events. They're going to harm these people more and more at the end of the day. Nothing is solved at this case. And people in Qatar will not be benefited as well because boycotting spreads a net awareness but never tackles the solution. No, thank you. It's 6 already. They might still instill awareness on the floor, but at the end of it depends on the government. Because even if there's a lot of people pushing, if the government has no incentive to push through this event through international discussion, there's nothing that's going to happen. Boycotting from the magic country means that they're not creating a better relationship between these countries, and these players are the face of their country. So that's why when they represent them, they're going to create a tense relationship between these countries. It means that common ground is harder to achieve, and solution to tackle these human rights and this country helping Qatar is more unlikely to happen on the other side of us. This is why we know that this domino effect affects the economy in the first place, and directly affects through the World Cup and indirectly affects to the relationship. So comparison, we tell you how my prime leader of opposition has already proved to you as how a young footballer in their prime is very important. And I'll tell you that we have to understand how this unchangeable career cannot happen. It's happened once 4 years. World Cup happened once 4 years. If they're going to miss the World Cup, it means that they're going to miss like 8 years. And we have undetermined factors in between, which are injuries or lack of form. It means that they have a lot of opportunities losing. It means that they cannot create an image for them for their career, and then they cannot support them once they retire. And then at the same time, we told you how boycotting can actually be achieved through other alternative methods, such as spreading information inside the competition itself. For example, like the captain armband and also Cristiano Ronaldo. We tell that we already know that they have a lot of voice, and we tell that these progressive voices could have been done in other places rather than boycotting. So we've mitigated the harms on our side that government is saying, was still providing a positive case into today's debate to tackle the benefits that are all netted. That's why I've never been bothered to oppose.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank the DLO for that fine speech. Just a reminder, and of course, applicable across the round. 7:15 is where I just stop taking notes. Anything beyond that is Ash territory. Do try to wrap your speech up by then. However, if you do continue beyond which, you won't really be allowed to take notes anymore. This is, of course, applicable all through the round. Good. That notwithstanding, I'd now like to invite the government whip. Sure.
Okay. Am I audible?
Clearly, whenever
Okay.
you're ready.
At any point in which my audio becomes really bad, please feel free to interrupt me. And I want my POS verbally as well. Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side opposition made our burden much easier when they conceded to the principal interest of the athlete and decided to run their counterfactual on this athlete kneeling down in courts or sending out a political message in the fields. I thought that I was going to have to refute to their point about like sponsors backing out or like athletes getting international criticism, but insofar as the athlete does these kind of political acts anyways in the field, the comparative is just like becomes on, for example, which method is more effective, or that like which side protects the principle of these athletes better, which I'm going to be engaging on later in my speech. Therefore, I think their counterfactual was kind of dumb to argue on, but I'm just going to engage on that grounds. But before I engage on that, let me just engage to their first and second point on like athletes and stuff. Okay, so engaging to their first point on athletes and why that harm applies to their side as well. So they say in their first point that athletes train hard for these events and that they would feel bad for backing out. Two responses to this. Firstly, this applies to their side as well, insofar as they like argue the counterfactual of protesting on the field, because you will get eliminated of a chance to be awarded. Even if you compete, it's likely to get significant backlash from the international community. Qatar won't be really happy with that. They will probably eliminate you of any honors, even if you did receive any. Therefore, I think this harm applies to their side as well. But secondly, even if that response wasn't enough, this is an individual actor motion. So insofar as the athlete made an autonomous decision, he likely trade these kind of awards off with rational consideration. He is at the prime, he has already done these kind of things, like win maybe the World Cup or get like a good honors in these kind of World Cup competitions. Therefore, I don't think that he will regret it. Therefore, their point is just false. Then let me engage their third point coming from their second about like human rights and like domino effects and all of these stuff. Okay, first of all, I just want to note that this is like very rhetoric. I don't think they had any logic to say that they would actually have these kind of impacts that they claim about countries literally having tension, because they say, for example, in their first speech that, you know, these people won't receive any media attention to be able to have these kind of impacts that we claimed. But then they literally say that these countries would have tension with each other, which is just like, which are two contradictory things. I don't think like these things are mutually exclusive. With that said, two responses. First, boycotting means that you can send a message to future competitions to do it. So they said something about how like you can't reverse things like the workers' exploitation through you boycotting. But it's not just about reversing that, right? Because that's not possible because they can't time trip. It is about sending a message to future competitions, future World Cups to not do the same thing, or else athletes will actually back down and teams will boycott. So for example, Kaepernick didn't exactly reverse BLM. However, he sent a signaling message to future competitions to care more about Black athletes. Therefore, we think that insofar as that signaling effect can be an impact that you get on our side of the house, we can like have the boycotting as a good like impact. But then secondly, they said something about how boycotting will mean that there will be tense relationship between countries. Two responses. Number one, on a mechanistic level, if the whole team boycotts, then this will apply because this shows that the country's stance is like there. But insofar as this is only an individual actor motion, and insofar as only one like athlete just backs out from the team that competes in the Qatar World Cup, I don't think it's going to show their country's stance as a whole. And therefore, I think Qatar is going to understand that even if one athlete backs out from the US, that's not the US stance. But secondly, even if that is true, that whole team like, you know, backs off, we can just actually trade that off, right? Because if these countries actually believe in these values anyways, then we believe that what's more important is getting these values out into the international society. Therefore, we think we can trade that off. With that said, then, let me first of all prove why boycotting is the more effective option than their counterfactual about like kneeling down in courts and stuff. So their argument here was that media will wash over like these kind of boycotting and stuff. I have four responses. Firstly, the premise of this argument is that athletes are not popular enough to get media attention, because insofar as I can prove to you that athletes are actually receiving a massive following from the international society, even if media washes over your beliefs, it's likely that boycotting will have a significant impact in sparking discourse on things like social media. So let's characterize what the athlete looks like. The athlete is likely to have massive media following. So this is because of the existence of games like Winning 11 or FIFA Mobile. There's a significant amount of people who know about these footballers at their prime and follow them on social media sites, right? This is why Ronaldo has like hundreds of millions of followers. Therefore, it's very likely that this athlete, especially if he's at their prime, it's likely that he has like massive media following for our impacts to stand. But secondly, if their premise stands that these athletes are like really unpopular, their side won't be any different if they protest out into courts. So even if they do these things on courts, they will get no attention because nobody cares about the athlete, right? Therefore, they have to choose either of the impacts to stand. But then third response, boycotting is an extremely radical step. So as compared to participating and then wearing shirts or like having their fists up, we think that boycotting will actually raise attention because it's something that that is there before these kind of competitions and stuff. And this will give them significant media platform. Therefore, because of the virtue of the fact that boycotting is an extreme radical step, it's likely that it's better and more effective than their counterfactual about kneeling down. But then fourthly, the counterfactual about kneeling down and stuff disrupts the games, right? What it does is there's going to be more stigma for these athletes and their teams because of things like sportsmanship errors when they disrupt the game in the middle of the game, right? So therefore, on our side, you can at least protect the integrity as a sportsman when you actually pre-announce that you're not participating in a competition. Therefore, stigma kind of like does these things where it actually like crowds out their actual message that they want to portray. Therefore, insofar as that doesn't happen, we think that we can actually do this more effectively and without stigma. You can send out a political message. Therefore, I flip their case. Their stance was like, I think, just kind of an inefficient and strategic stance to choose. But then thirdly, let me engage on their idyllic like paradigm where the LO didn't actually say that they're counterfactual and their counterfactual is like doing nothing, right? In that case, I'm going to engage on which side protects the principle of these athletes better. So before that, let me just characterize the athletes a little bit more, because these athletes have probably done a few things regarding this progressive beliefs in the past. Why is this the case? Because World Cup is the most honorable title for any individual participating in football. This means that the fact that he's contemplating boycotting this shows that this person holds a very significant attachment to his political beliefs of progressive liberalism. What is the likely factual then? Two things. Firstly, he would have voluntarily used his media platform to speak up about these issues before. But secondly, even if he voluntarily didn't do anything, he would have probably had to answer some political questions in interviews and stuff, right? Therefore, we think that the athletes have shown to the public that his personal stance is in politics, when that's actually the case, and when his following expects him to speak up about these kind of issues, and when he actually does nothing about these kind of Qatar World Cup, we think that that's actually going to make these fans kind of get angry. Or for example, he's going to feel himself that his personal stance is not being portrayed there. Therefore, there's going to be kind of the dissatisfaction from two actors here. Firstly, the athlete himself and his fans. For all of those reasons, we think that protecting the principle of these athletes was the winning metric for us as well. For those two reasons, because number one, their side is ineffective, and secondly, we protect the principle, we think that we have taken today's debate.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank the government whip for that fine speech. Now I'd like to call upon the opposition whip. Here.
Am I audible?
We can hear you clearly whenever you're ready.
Good day to the honorable representatives on the other side of the aisle. Today, the government is trying to pass a motion that this house, as a progressive young footballer in their prime, would boycott the 2022 Qatar World Cup. Firstly, I would just want to debate what the honorable Prime Minister has brought upon to this. Footballers in their prime are at the prime of their careers actually only begin when they reach their prime, because it is the most important part of their entire career. Because it is a part where they are most energetic and physically most able. The beginner benefit of the team is illogical, to be fair, as this makes the footballer lose a chance to shine in the global spotlight for himself and the nation. In general, most young footballers do not get much of general media attention, which means their message does not get out of the spectrum of football supporters. Furthermore, boycotting an event wouldn't mean much, as international media would likely gloss over the issue because it's just a boycott and not give much attention to the purpose of the boycott itself, as the media does not have the incentive to report on a young individual football player, progressive or not. Now, moving on to my argument. A progressive young football player in their prime and their relation to the World Cup. I believe that it should be understood that these athletes in their prime have a limited time to show their skills, as I said before. And because they spend a quarter of their lives training their heart out, it is unjustified to take all that away. Being able to join a World Cup means a lot to these athletes because it is their childhood dream to join something this prestigious. Because it is 195 of all nations are going to participate and only happens every 4 years. So this person will likely have to wait another 4 years for the next World Cup. And probably by that time, he will likely lose his form or be injured by any other way. Moving on to my next point. Boycotting that will not outweigh the harms that will be put onto the football itself. This is because the damage has already been done towards these workers. And at the end of the day, it would be even worse because these workers would be even more exploited to compensate for their work instead of being valued. Furthermore, the government would probably try to hide and cover up this exploitation. And these football players' careers depends on the World Cup because it is a giant, immensely big gateway for their fan base to grow and shine. And then rejected, and then to receive the recognition they deserve. So if we strip them of the sole way receiving what they worked hard for all these years, it will be very difficult for them to survive and live the comfortable life at the end and want to after they retire from this.
What is information?
Go on.
Okay, so insofar as this is an actor's motion, if he actually made the trade-off of these kind of things like World Cup, your argument doesn't apply in this debate. Please respond to that.
Please repeat.
Okay, so this is an actor's motion, meaning that all the harms about this individual not participating in things like World Cup and him feeling sad about these kind of things is okay insofar as he rationally decided and traded off things like that. How do you respond to that?
I believe he believes in his political beliefs that are to be right. But nevertheless, there are also alternate motions which I will touch upon in the further part of this debate. To my next point, don't worry, I'm going to touch upon that point. It is the media and the people who are less interested into football. Not everybody's interested in football. We should remember the part. To just take an example, the Oscars. Would people normally watch the Oscars? No. But how did this year's, especially this year's Oscars, become very famous? Because of the celebrity incident between Will Smith and Chris Rock. Because he slapped him. That is why this year's Oscars are very much famous compared to the last 5 years. So we should remember that too.
Why?
Rejected. Right. My next argument will be on the domino effect. Because we should remember, as I touched before, human rights have already been infringed. We cannot reverse it. It's already been done, inflicted. So you can spread the message by boycotting. But we have the risk that it's becoming worse. Because boycotting only means we are likely to lose even more people who watch these games. Which means the revenue the companies gain, especially the FIFA World Cup gains, is decreased. Meaning, as I said just now, the people in charge want to subsidize it. They want to make the people work more for less. Okay, I mean, boycotting does spread awareness, but as I said, just to an extent, but never tackles the core solution of the problem, which would be between the citizens of Qatar and its government, which, mind you, live in a nation of an absolutist government. Now, boycotting from major countries, now this is important because this also means that you are not creating a better relationship between these countries. And having good relationship is the substantial foundation of having a diplomatic solution, which clearly for a problem like this is the best way to tackle it. And this, because the non-existence of a common ground between the both actors involved, it does not achieve the solutions or tackle the human rights violations committed by the Qatari government. Okay, now I want to talk about the best case scenario in the Gulf world. The boycott is much more published and made famous in media internationally, even though it may not be very, it does have very small chance to happen. And the government hopes that the Qatari government changes its current labor policies for the better so that the workers can get better benefits. Now I want to talk about the opposition's world. The best case scenario in our world, instead of the boycott, the message the player presents that does not have the same government wishes to do, because the boycott has an added benefit of being more widely public because it is on international media, it's on TV and people watch it internationally, while boycott is only based on news media. Maybe, yes, I do agree. The Qatari government is not pleased, as the Prime Minister and the government we had touched upon. But he has the back. Now this player has the backing of the general global audience, which will mitigate the responses of the Qatari government towards our own government and its players. In conclusion, the government proposes that this house, as a progressive young footballer in their prime, to boycott the 2022 Qatar World Cup, which does not mean much, as the alternative we are proposing, we can
Is the speaker still in the call? It seems as though they ended this speech rather abruptly and seems to side opposition. If you'd like to confirm that real quick.
Going to confirm with you. I'm not sure what.
Sure. I do believe the speech was almost over in the sense that it was 7 minutes and 10 seconds. And we're okay with proceeding otherwise. But if you'd like to get in touch with your teammate, that'd be great. Side op.
Wait, if that's the case, if it's already 7 minutes, I think we can proceed with the next speech. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we're going ahead with op reply regardless, but if you'd like for us to wait till your teammate reconnects, that's an option, or at least confirm if you all are good to proceed.
I think we should be good to proceed.
Fantastic. Then we could call upon op reply.
Yeah, all right. I can be heard? Yes.
Clearly audible, yes.
Thank you. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, honestly, I feel like the government is just footballing their case and their rebuttals at this point, pun intended. Okay, let's go into my reply speech. First part, first part. They mentioned that they don't remember football players that are in their prime, which is proving their point on how football players are only football players get famous for them being spokesperson and them being influential people in society, right? You're not sure. I'll take them on that point. Take them on their best case scenario, right? However, we are actually fighting for the same thing, right? But you can still be an influential person, and we can do it even better because we are not actually putting the career of the footballer on the line. They constantly say that they want to trade this off, and they constantly ignore our points on how this is ignore our points on the urgency of this and the importance of the footballer's career, but we still have to take into account that their career of their careers and that they have put in so much work, right? So remember, these are athletes that we are talking about, right? Not social media influencers. We want something that is more natural for them, right? Which is what they have been working so hard for: sports. Secondly, they say that the actors have already They say that the actors have already won before, which just proves that they never actually really once engaged on our point on how we say that is so important, and never once engaged on our best case scenario, right? Next, they respond to us saying that if we go with our mechanism, right, then we will automatically get disqualified, or we will disrupt the integrity of the competition and whatnot. But we say that this is an assertion and it's just simply untrue, because logically, right, if you think you would not get disqualified just for kneeling on the grass, right? Like Cristiano Ronaldo will probably be banned after the CU incident, right? So this just shows that their rebuttals are getting more and more far-fetched. Now, next, they talked about how they want boycotting to raise attention and awareness for the next competitions, right? But we say that competitions will never stop exploiting their workers. They will never stop being bad, right? Because they know other countries have the bigger incentive to join in, and exploitation will occur symmetrically on both sides of the house, and it's even worse on their side because the only thing they're doing is harming their footballers at the same time, while not being able to curb this problem. Okay, now let's go into like comparison and like clashes and what both sides talked about, right? First of all, they said that they are very good because they build athletes' career. We say that athletes are people who work very hard, and they have to work out to be an athlete. And it's not just about their social image and influence. And this is why they will never work, because they're actually risking their athlete's career. Secondly, they say that they're very good because they are morally correct, right? Take moral high ground. If we are being very, very charitable to them, right, and we give them that clash, we say it is still insignificant in today's debate, because we can do something that is even more morally justified on our side as well. To value all of our actors. Number one, the players. Number two, the workers and sports industry as a whole. Now, they said they are very good because in the future competitions we see boycotting as a deterrent, right? Boycotting is never going to stop a bad World Cup from happening, ladies and gentlemen. Everything we said will still happen in the domino effect. One progressive player in prime from France pulls out doesn't mean that there isn't 100 more French players who would want to join the 23-man squad, because being in a World Cup is once in a lifetime opportunity. One country pulling out doesn't mean that the other 50 countries don't want the spot, because they've never qualified for the World Cup before. This is rendering their whole case useless. Now, they also said that, we are so bad because if people kneel, they'll get disqualified, which I mentioned and already counted that before. So look, the fact of the matter is they have brought out a case that we can do so much better on our side, and the only benefit that they have and we don't have is like the quote-unquote moral high ground. But even on that, we still have some part of moral in our case at the end of the day. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank the government reply speaker for their comments, and now I'd like to call upon the opposition reply speaker for their comments. Now I'd like to call upon the government reply speaker. Sure.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly clearly. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, give me 2 seconds to set up my timer. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. We wait on opposition's own rhetoric because listen to their language. They say we can have other methods like wearing symbols or spreading information. But firstly, if that's the case, it's unclear as to why we cannot co-opt these benefits and use various mechanisms to backlash and boycott the Quarter Cup. So yes, we absolutely agree that there is a massive issue in status quo. We directly fix that issue in a more efficient way. But secondly, it means that they can see that all of our benefits are true and are important on a massive scale. It's just that we get them faster on a larger scale. Thus, opposition not only footballs the entire debate, but shoot a penalty goal with their counterfactual. 3 themes then that I'll talk about. Firstly, on gaining popularity and status. Secondly, on the individual self-perception. And lastly, on the societal good. Firstly, then on popularity and the well-being of these players. The reason why we win this clash is quite simple. It's because opposition just doesn't engage the crux of our case. What we tell you is that there's millions and billions of football players that are all at their prime. So the benefits that they want to talk about are very short term. Because sure, maybe you are able to get a few more fans at the World Cup, but you're already in your prime, and that's very small impact. This means 2 things. Firstly, it means these individuals have already many times experienced the luxuries and joys of being famous, and the fact that they're in their prime specifically means that a lot of the benefits that opposition want to talk about are things that they've experienced in facing this or reaching this peak in itself, so the harm there is not very big. But secondly, these individuals already have an established fan base that are probably also very progressive, so the conservative people that they want to talk about are very small delta. Second thing I want to point out is that the only way in which you get long-term sustainable change is becoming figureheads and icons of progressive ideas or movements, which we say is what happened with things like Gandhi or Emma Watson. That means people remember you for being more than just a player, because football and sports in itself are very short term. You only get money when you're in your prime. You need representation in the long term and people to remember you, so you're able to do things that you want to do, because money frees up your choice. You don't get forced into coaching. You don't get forced into other things that you don't want to do. You free up your autonomy. But even if we lose out on all of the practical benefits and the world absolutely burns and goes to hell, our worst case is still their best case scenario. Because look, in our worst case, the radical action and change is not as radical. Maybe the media attention isn't as large, but their best case scenario is our worst in the soft stance. So if LO says it's really hard to get media attention, then that's precisely the reason why you get substantially less on opposition when you don't take radical actions and you don't get this type of media representation. People are now less shocked, they care less, they don't spur as much discourse, so all of the benefits that they want to talk about is literally our worst case scenario. They thus needed to engage with our best case scenario and why that was something that was bad as well. But I also want to flag here that they never outweigh why the potential harm of not training is going to outweigh your arguments of principle and a larger fan base, despite the fact that there are various other competitions. And this is a response in second that goes entirely unengaged with. Secondly, then on self-perception, our claim here once again is simple, that when you know you could have done something more, when you know that there was a more radical push you could have done for yourself and your fans and the loved ones around you that was principally consistent to what you actually believe in, and when you actually believe in, when you don't take these types of actions, you feel guilt. And that's the invisible box that people can never escape. The constant fear of knowing you could have done more. When you watch these injustices and exploitation continue to happen, knowing you could have been a direct solution in helping these types of things, the guilt that you feel is something that's going to last forever, and it's going to harm these individuals on a massive scale. Then lastly, quickly on the society, opposition whip claims that when you boycott the games, you harm the game. 2 things I want to flag. Firstly, it's unclear as to why individuals need to prioritize the game, because as we flag out in all 3 speeches, this is an actor motion. They specifically needed to prove why this was in the interest of the actor or the player. But secondly, we don't think there's a reason why you need to prioritize the game. Firstly, you have a higher obligation towards yourself and the capacity to make your decisions. And as an individual before a sports player, you should always have the right to do something that aligns with your values, even if there's a utilitarian harm. But secondly, you think you've already fulfilled the burden of helping the team or the sports industry. You've already probably gotten a lot of attention for this sport in itself. You've already experienced a lot of the highs, and you probably already created a lot of fans and helped win championships. So it's unclear as to why they need to take this even more burden and do even more than they currently do. The rest of their case then just isn't very nuanced in motion either. They never prove that direct harm on players. If the benefit that side opposition wanted to argue was a cake, then they desperately try to eat it all up. The problem then is that they don't clean up their own mess of the case and smears all of the benefit that we provide across the floor. Propose.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank the government reply speaker for their comments. Additionally, everyone in the room for what I felt was a rather interesting debate. Good. If we could have the teams also recording perhaps